All right. Might just wait one more minute and then we'll start.
Thanks, Ntando.
Right, I'll get us started so we can use up our hour well. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the third webinar for the African, well, actually, this is the fifth webinar for the African Impact in Australia project. My name is Ntando Ngwenya. I'm the project officer for the project. I'm based at Curtin University, and I'll be moderating today's session. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands that I'm coming from today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Our project does sit across the country, and obviously you're all coming in from across Australia as well. So I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands across Australia and pay my respects to them, their cultures and elders past and present. And I'd like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. So a little bit of background about the seminar series. We started about 2 years ago with one webinar that's held every 6 months, and we just share findings from the research that we've been doing in that time. So far, we've covered an overview of the demographics of Africans living in Australia. We've done an analysis exploring how migrants navigate the law to unlock their economic potential. We've looked at how African Australian community organizations represent themselves online, and we've looked at diaspora diplomacy as well. And you can find the recordings of these webinars on the African Impact in Australia website. If you can't access that website, please feel free to send us an email and we'll share the link to the website with you as well. Today, we're very pleased to have you join us to talk about results from a national survey that we've recently conducted. I won't spoil much so our presenter can have more time to share, but it's been very exciting what we found from it so far. So before we begin the session, just like to do a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, please just ensure that your microphones are off. This will help eliminate any background noise so we can hear our presenter clearly today. Secondly, just to let you know, if you've just joined, the session is being recorded. So a recording of the session can be available on our website within the next 2 weeks. If you want your face to show in the recording, please feel free to have your camera on. But as I said before, please feel free to turn that off if you don't want us to see your face, because this is in kind of a team setting to allow for question and answer at the end of the session. If you have any questions, any issues during the session, please just use the chat function to let us know of any issues that you may have. Please also do submit your questions using the chat function if they come up in real time. Otherwise, we will have a moment for question and answer at the end of the session as well. So as I said, just a bit of our session overview. Today, we're looking forward to hearing from Professor Farida Fozdar, who is the lead investigator for this project. So she'll introduce the project, give a bit of an overview of it, and then she'll discuss the results from the national survey, which I mentioned. And at the end, we will have an audience Q&A session as well. Again, if anyone has any questions, please send them through via the chat function, or we'll open up for questions at the end of the session. So at this point, I'm happy to introduce Professor Farida Fozdar, who will give us an overview of the project and talk about the survey findings. So Farida is Professor of Sociology and Dean Global Futures at Curtin University. Her research focuses on migration, race and ethnicity, refugee settlement, racism, nationalism, global citizenship, and cosmopolitanism. And she is the lead investigator of this project. She does always send me a very short bio to read about her, but she's actually way more impressive than I just made it sound. So Farida, I now turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Ntando, and thank you for all of your work putting these webinars together and your introduction. It's greatly appreciated. And I'd also just like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, whose lands were never ceded. So yes, we're very excited to be able to share with you the results from this survey. And of course, I'm sharing, it wouldn't even be a quarter of the results that we have. And we have not We have not done the kind of the detailed analysis that we're planning to for this, but we wanted to start getting the information out there as quickly as possible. So this is why we're just doing a kind of a quickie seminar based on a few of the results today. And I will look forward very much to your questions and comments towards the end. So I'll try to go through quite quickly so that we do have time for that. Okay, so project overview, I'll just give you a little bit of a reminder to people who may have joined us before, and for those who have not, about what the project is about, and then focus will be on the survey findings, and then audience Q&A. So this is just an image that we use, which is the 9 chief investigators from the project. We have a mix of people of African backgrounds and not of African backgrounds, more senior and more mid-career and junior researchers as well. And you can see there the range of universities who are involved in this project. So it's quite a big project in terms of the people doing the work on it. Our research objective, and this is not a kind of an explicitly stated objective, but it is one of the key ones, is to recognize and to offer an alternative narrative to the one that is often out there about African migrants to Australia. That narrative is often one of deficit, of sort of communities in conflict, African youth gangs, people who are a drain on our welfare system, people who come without invitation. There's this kind of very, very negative narrative which is out there, and that has been perpetuated mainly by some conservative politicians, but also in the media quite often, and by the general public, and also by some of us researchers, that we have tended to focus on issues such as employment issues such as racism, issues such as mental health challenges, intergenerational issues, housing issues, and so on. And we don't want to say that these are not issues, that they certainly are, but there is another story to be told. And so this is what we're trying to collect data from a range of different sources, and particularly from a larger kind of a more diverse demographic than a lot of the previous research, which has focused particularly on humanitarian entrants from just 1 or 2 main countries. So we want to understand the complex dynamics of the African diaspora, and particularly how their political and economic agency is exercised. And I've got a slide, a couple of slides from now, where I talk a little bit about what that agency is. So we're looking at political consciousness, the sort of political leanings that people have, the ways in which they feel that they have the ability to exercise their agency in terms of formal politics and informal politics, and then looking at economic activity, including employment, education levels, income, occupation trends, and so on, and consumption and investment practices and entrepreneurial activity as well, which are not areas that others have necessarily looked at. So within the project, we have a number of sub-projects, and I'm not going to go through them in any detail, but you can see the project I'm talking about today is that second block there, which is the national survey. You may have been at some of our other webinars which have focused on analysis, the social media analysis, policy analysis, and we haven't yet talked much about the interviews, but we will be doing some that focus on those. So what do we mean by agency? Basically, we want to recognize that migrants demonstrate political and economic initiative through their advocacy. And we have Ruvi here with us today, and Ruvi Goradama, she's doing a PhD looking at African associations, organizations, and looking at how they advocate for African communities here. So that's one element or example of political agency. Then we're interested in economic activities, as I've mentioned, investment, as well as transnational engagement. So political agency, we mean the ability to speak and be heard and act towards a desired outcome. So basically, it's about power. It's about the ability to exercise power. And we're interested in reframing Africans in Australia as purposive political agents. And we're looking at formal, as I said, political activity as well as informal. And then economic agency, recognizing that, yes, labour market activity is an important economic activity, but there are a whole bunch of other ones: entrepreneurship, investment, sending of remittances. We've collected a bunch of data on remittances as well. And yeah, sort of transnational investment as well as local investment. And we also recognise that the African Union has recognised the value of the African diaspora globally by designating it the sixth region of Africa. So trying to incorporate the economic and political kind of contributions of Africans around the world into the identity of Africa itself. I won't go over this slide because I've really covered it already. Okay, so what was this research? So this was a survey that was designed by the members of the team, and we went through many iterations of the survey. We had a whole bunch of questions we wanted to ask. I can't remember quite how many questions we ended up with, but we kept having to kind of whittle things down and refine things because we didn't want it to take too long for people, but we also wanted to make sure that we collected the information that was going to be useful and helpful to us, and it wasn't available from other surveys. We realized that, contracting a social research company, we were going to get a better sample than what we could have achieved ourselves. And so we got a company called New Focus, who, once we had designed the survey, they were the ones who sent it out. And they sent it, you can see we recruited through social media, Facebook and Instagram primarily, through just advertising, even, flyers and posters at events. Also, there was an existing online panel that it was sent to. So panel just means a kind of a sample of people. So any who were of African background or had a parent of African heritage could participate in the research. Through snowballing, that's just kind of inviting people who we know, and contacting community organisations, as well as the contacts that we have. And the result was we were very pleased with the response rate. We had 834 people who participated, who were either born in Africa or their parents were born in Africa. Fieldwork was conducted over this sort of 3-4 month period, towards the end of last year and earlier this year. Okay, so you can see that 75% of our sample there were born in Africa, and the other percentages, either the parents were born in Africa, one or both parents. You can see also that we had quite a good spread across the different states of Australia. Okay, so getting into some of the findings before I get on to kind of political and economic agency, just got a couple of slides about reasons for migration. So again, this is to kind of question some of the assumptions in the public's mind and politicians' minds about why Africans are here in Australia. The assumption can tend to be, because all of the research has been on humanitarian entrance, that they are fleeing conflict in their countries of origin. And our results do confirm that, but they also show a bunch of other reasons why people move. So to escape war, conflict, or political insecurity, to seek better job opportunities, has almost as many people kind of ticking that box. To escape insecure economic conditions. Now, that also was a significant factor. A lot have come, like 1 in 5 have come to study at a tertiary institution, and smaller proportions to reunite with family, some to take job offers, and then smaller numbers for the other options that were available. So yeah, that's sort of interesting data, I think. The younger the migrant, the more likely they've come to seek better job opportunities, and you can see that in the little description there. Okay, I'll just move to the next slide. What was interesting about reasons for migration, and I haven't included the slides because I had to make some choices, was that the first option here, that we assume that this is the reasons that Black Africans moved to Australia. But in fact, higher proportions of white Africans are moving for that top reason compared to Black Africans, a significantly statistically significant difference in the proportions there. And to me, that was really eye-opening. The idea, and of course, most of that the white South African white African population are from South Africa, and so you can see that their main reason would be things like political insecurity and so on. I just think that it's interesting to recognise that there are there are these alternative stories to tell and assumptions that we make without thinking carefully about it. So why Australia rather than elsewhere? And again, here I haven't got a slide, but there is a difference between white and Black Africans. Main reasons, opportunities available were key for both groups, family connections, and connections to communities and so on. Similarity to the home country, that was statistically significantly much higher for white Africans than it was for Black Africans. Stability, location of jobs, and so on. So yeah, people are coming mainly for the opportunities and family connections. Women, there are, if you look at the bottom 3 dot points, higher proportion of males choose to migrate due to the opportunities available compared to females. And for women, it was more likely that that's the location of a job offer. The second dot point is the point that I was making about the difference between white and Black or mixed population, that 18% of the white and other chose Australia due to its similarity to the home country, compared to a much, much smaller proportion of Black or mixed participants. Okay. So moving on now to political issues and engagement. Basically, we asked a question about what the main kind of political issues of concern were for the communities, and we provided a number of options, which are often options that are given in quantitative in surveys such as this. And so cost of living, perhaps not surprisingly, was the highest. Health was also very high, education, issues around crime and justice, and it's a bit difficult to know what people meant when they said crime and justice, because it may be that they were concerned about their own security in Australia, or it may have been a response that is about the representations of Africans in terms of crime and justice. There was an opportunity later on in the survey for people to provide further feedback, and so some people did talk about this as part of the qualitative responses that they gave. Housing, poverty, and inequality. And I found it fascinating that discrimination and prejudice was halfway down this list. Because in the qualitative bit where people could make comments towards the end, people talked a lot about racism and discrimination experienced. But when asked about the major political issues of concern, cost of living, which is a general issue for the Australian population generally, that was the highest one, along with health and education, as I've said. Okay. We looked at these political issues that they saw as most important by gender and by race. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a breakdown by gender, and you can see that higher proportions of women than men found health, cost of living, and education important issues. Crime and justice was seen as more important for men, poverty and inequality more important for women, and so on. And domestic violence down there towards the bottom was significant for a third of women. By race, you can see that the top two, there's not huge differences, whether one is a Black or mixed African versus a white or other. slight difference in terms of education, crime and justice. That's a significant difference there. Poverty and inequality, more of an issue for Black Africans. Likewise, of course, for discrimination and prejudice. Okay, so how do people lean in terms of their kind of political views? Here we have self-identified political views, and I think on the next slide I've got the actual kind of voting patterns. So moderate was the main one, and it's hard to know what do people mean by moderate. I have a feeling that the very term moderate has sort of a normative kind of preference to it, so that people might be more likely to say, oh, well, I'm sort of in the middle. But if you add up all the left-leaning ones, you get a higher proportion than those who ticked kind of right-leaning, although they're pretty close. So 26% stated they're left in their politics, and you can add the 8% that identify as socialist and the 1% that identify as communist. 22% said that they were conservative, and you can add 9% who identified as right-leaning. So yeah, it sort of breaks into thirds. Left, slightly more than a third on the left, a third in the middle, and slightly less than a third on the right. So which political party most represents your views in Australia? Again, slightly left-leaning. I personally was surprised at the significant support for Greens Party. And so if you put kind of Greens and Labor together, the total is around 57%. So we're kind of interested a little in whether the African community can be seen as a voting bloc. And of course, since Jacinta Namatjira-Price's commentary about Indian migrants and Labor letting in more Indian migrants because they'll vote for them, I think this is kind of an interesting response. Don't tell the libs. Sorry, I've just gone back. The difference between male and female there, slightly women, and this is found across the board, that women tend to be slightly more left-leaning, men right-leaning, and perhaps not surprisingly, the breakdown by race is very interesting there as well. You can see that about a quarter, it's over a quarter of white Africans are voting Liberal, as opposed to much smaller proportions of Black Africans. Okay, so in terms of kind of level of confidence in being able to navigate political issues in Australia, you can see that a good proportion of our participants said that they were good or very good, or felt very confident at understanding the political issues in Australia. A slight majority felt that they could be involved in the political process if they wanted to, and that they could discuss political issues, Australian political issues, if they wanted to. However, in terms of having power, or a sense that they have power or a voice in Australia, you're getting less than half, slightly less than half, agreeing with those statements, which is, I think, quite significant, and just over a quarter who trust political leaders in Australia to represent their interests. So that's quite damning, I think, in terms of the sense that there's not a feeling of power, and that politicians are looking after your own interests. Okay, in terms of statistically significant differences, males felt that they were more likely to say they have a good understanding of political issues than females, but there was still, a clear majority who agreed with that statement. And likewise for confidence in terms of political issues. Women were less likely to follow politics in Australia than men. And interestingly, those who were Black or mixed, and we kind of combined that category, were significantly more likely to agree with the statements related to understanding politics and feeling that they were able to affect government policies, compared to white and other respondents. Okay, so political representation in Australia. Um, so there were very low levels of agreement that Australian politicians care about issues facing Africans in Australia. Only 1 in 10 agreed with that statement, and 66% believe that Australian politicians don't care about African affairs in general. Um, uh, I was surprised at the low proportions who agreed that they have faith in African community leaders to represent their best interests. That's 1 in 5, slightly less than 1 in 5. But they did feel more likely to be effective politically by being involved in their community organizations than in other kind of forms of politics. Um, so yeah. I'm going to have to go a bit more quickly so that we can get to the question time. And I do want to spend a bit of time on the qualitative slides at the end. So, what are the barriers to participation in the formal politics in Australia? Basically, people said that they were too busy. They don't feel they have enough power to influence change. A lot of people just sort of weren't interested in politics. A quarter said that they didn't have sufficient African Australian role models to encourage them to kind of get into politics. Some people, of course, couldn't vote because they weren't citizens, and so they weren't that interested in politics. There were some differences depending on the region of Africa that people came from, and you can see some of those differences there. Western and Eastern Africa, and that may have something to do with the visa category that people have come on. But this is what I mean when I say we need to do more detailed statistical analysis to see what these differences relate to, the various variables that the differences relate to. Okay, so economic agency. And I want to just sort of make the point that we have not yet analysed the income and spending data. Like, we did ask questions around income, and we realised that we need to be very careful about how we represent that data. So that's not part of this presentation. All right, so the vast majority of respondents are engaged in the workforce in Australia, 56% working of our participants, 56% working full-time, 10% owning their own business. And we've noticed that that's a significant pattern among the African community in Australia. There are high proportions who are engaged in their own businesses. Yeah, so those are just the breakdown, and you can see that middle graph there. It breaks down the type of areas where people are working. So you've got a significant number who are managers. Then you've got healthcare workers, which is perhaps not surprising, professionals, technicians, and so on. And we will again do more detailed analysis to break down these results. People also were very active in terms of voluntary work. So 42% did voluntary work for an organisation or group in the last 12 months. There are also significant proportions of people, 1 in 5, providing unpaid care for family members and looking after children other than their own. So, point being that there is a lot of productive activity going on. Some of it is paid and some of it is unpaid among this community. Again, there's a lot on this slide. Basically, just showing some of the breakdowns in terms of the where people are situated in terms of their employment. And I won't spend too much time on this, but this here you can see that there are differences between the Black and the white populations, and I would like to draw your attention to the table on the bottom left-hand side, that there are significantly, those little arrows there show that this is a significant difference, significantly more Black Africans employed full-time than white Africans. Employment by gender, again, there are some differences in terms of the type of work, the level of work, and the type of occupation. Okay. This is an interesting one. So I've done research where people from a range of different migrant backgrounds, not just from the African region, but from a lot of different places, have um, criticised the fact that their qualifications are not recognised in Australia, and who have ended up in very low, kind of lower level jobs, driving taxis, doing kind of menial care work or security work and so on, because their qualifications from their country of origin and even their qualifications from here have not been recognised, have not, yeah, they haven't been able to use them. For our sample, 75% said that they are working at a level that recognises their qualifications and experience. That was a surprise to me. And yeah, 69% are working 35 hours, so basically full time, and 20% are working at more than one job. And that's another pattern that we've noticed in the interviews that we've been doing. Um, yeah, just looking at what else to pull out. That's probably sufficient from that slide. I just wanted to make that point because I think it's really important that yes, there are a proportion of people whose qualifications are not recognised, but of our sample, 75% said that they were working at the level that recognises their qualifications and experience. Most people, 81%, said that they did not receive any financial support from government. Um, yeah, and we need to unpick that one a little bit because most of the population receives some form of family benefit or kind of childcare subsidy and stuff like that. But I think people answered this in terms of, are they getting unemployment benefit, for example, or a retirement pension and so on? And a vast majority of Africans in Australia are not. Um, Okay, career and achievements. We ask people, so, okay, you're working. How do you feel about that? Do you feel as though you've achieved what you wanted to achieve in terms of employment opportunities here? And a majority, 61%, said that they are satisfied with the progress they've made towards meeting their career goals. In Australia, again, 59% said that there are many jobs available in Australia given the level of skills and experience. And same proportion that they're satisfied with the success they've achieved in their career in Australia. Um, just over half are satisfied with the income that they have. Not surprisingly, those that have 50,000, over 50,000 in their savings were more satisfied overall than those with less. Um, so yeah, as I said, we kind of need to break down some of these results. Um, People who own their own business or are employed full time are more satisfied with their career and achievements compared to those employed casually. Again, no particular surprises there. Confidence in ability to manage their own finances and also possibilities for entrepreneurship if they wanted to develop their own business and so on. 68% were confident in managing their finances themselves, and that if they wanted to, 40% were confident that if they wanted to start a business, they'd know where to start. In terms of whether they could get finances to start their own business, a lower proportion, 30%, said that they knew where they could, or that they had money or knew where they could access money. Just looking at the other points. Yeah, 83% of the people who said that they could, that they would have enough capital to start their own business said that they could dip into their own personal savings to do that. Remittances sent to family in the country of origin. Now, we had quite a few questions on remittances, and Notando, who introduced us today, she's doing a PhD, which will be looking at remittances. She'll have a bit of a focus on Zimbabwean migrants, and she'll be looking at in more detail using kind of qualitative methods. But we do have some quantitative data here. So significant proportions of the population send remittances back to Africa. It's about half basically, either regularly or occasionally. So 48%. a higher proportion of males contribute a larger amount, so over $1,000 a year compared to females. And that probably reflects the kind of gender dynamics of families and earning capacity as well. Not surprisingly, significantly higher proportion of Black and mixed participants compared to white and other send remittances, but still, this surprised me that over half of white and other participants send remittances as well. Okay. So then these are the final couple of slides which focus on barriers faced. You remember I said that we had a set of questions where people could kind of answer using words rather than ticking the boxes and showing us numbers. So sorry, I'm just putting out. Oh, yeah, I don't like these sort of animated or transition slides. So 11, well, and I just want to make the point that 1 in 10 said there were no barriers in Australia to achieving their economic and political goals. However, the vast majority who did feel that there were barriers, they identified these things. Now, I'm not going to go through these in detail. I will just point out that discrimination and racism was one of the most significant that people identified. They felt that they were being kind of profiled, assumptions were being made about their skills, capacity, their trustworthiness, and so on. Social isolation and lack of networks, people felt that because because the African population is kind of small in Australia, and because they may not have the networks to access job opportunities and information and so on, that they were socially isolated and disadvantaged in terms of kind of employment opportunities. Lack of political representation and role models. So some kind of wrote about that they felt unheard, they felt disengaged, they felt invisible, even at the local council level, as well as right on up to state and national levels. Overseas qualifications, as I said, a majority of the participants said that their qualifications and experience were recognised, but for many it wasn't. And so they also wrote about that, and you can have a read of that little quote. We've just taken a couple of excerpts, quotes for you to have a look at. Cost of living, you remember back to the question we asked about what are the main political issues. This was the highest one, and people wrote about it more in this section of the questionnaire. And several related it back to the sending of remittances, which they saw as sort of a double tax. We know remittances are called black tax, but they're paying for the high costs of living in Australia, they're paying for housing and so on, they're paying their taxes here, and then they're also having to send money kind of back home to support family and so on. And I particularly like this quote where the person has said, you cannot celebrate your wins in Australia with family back home because of the fear that they will ask for money. So yeah, that gives a sense of that sort of obligation that people feel to remit. Issues around visas, getting the ability to stay longer, processing times, and the costs of applying for visas and so on, which creates financial strain. Then I think there are a couple of things here. Yep. So 46% said that they had experienced some form of discrimination in Australia. They talked about racism based on their skin color, their ethnic background, microaggressions, such as people kind of being surprised when you can speak the English language well, or you're clearly kind of educated. So the stereotypes that people are constantly kind of butting up against. Discrimination in the employment market, which is well documented. There's a lot of studies on this generally as a phenomenon within Australia and for the African communities particularly. Discrimination in housing and the rental market, discrimination at school, again, teachers assuming lower levels of capability of African young people, and religious-based discrimination with this sort of double jeopardy of people who may have visible religious identities as well as their African identity as well. So conclusion. Okay, so it's for some reason it's not letting. I had just some very simple conclusions. So high levels of engagement politically and economically in Australia, and that's not to dismiss that there are some people who are being left behind, and we need to think about kind of policy recommendations to assist those people. The range of diversity of experiences, I think, is fascinating from this. And as I said, we'll dig down into the data based on some of the different kind of demographics that we have here. And yeah, just these sort of significant differences among subgroups based on gender, on race, visa category, and so on. So I will leave it at that, and I'm sure that you have a whole bunch of questions that you would like to ask, and we would love to hear them. There are several members of the ARC research project team here today, and I'm very happy for anyone else to jump in and answer any of the questions as well. Okay, so that's it from me, and let's take some questions. Thanks, Natando.
Thank you, Farida. That was incredible. I was writing notes like I haven't already seen some of this because every time I'm like, wow, this new finding. So very, very interesting. As Farida said, we'll now open up for questions. We have a good 18 minutes. So I guess I'll invite people to raise their hands, use the raise hand section so we can call you out individually. But as people are thinking of their questions, I'll just start with the two comments and the one question that we had in the chat section, and maybe you want to speak to those. So the first that we got was around racism, talking about racism and discrimination could be experienced across all these leading factors. And the suggestion, this is from Franca, might be quite insightful to dig into the sites of discrimination for participants. And then there was another one about school discrimination being very significant and overlooked as well as a factor. And then we had a question which I think David, who's not here, would be the best person to speak to. So I don't know if someone else would like to speak to it. But it says some African Australians play or have played a role in major parties and run for office on the local, state, or federal level. Did you get to speak to any of them, and what were their views? And then maybe also last one, would people from South Africa be the highest number of respondents in the survey?
In the survey. Oh, that's an easy one. We did have a lot of South Africans, and we capped it when we realised that we had, that they were reaching basically the proportion of South Africans. So the proportion of the African population in Australia, and Sarah is the expert on this, and she may want to add a comment as well. We tried to match the proportions of Africans from different backgrounds, and so when we saw that there were many South Africans responding, we then capped the responses. So they do. In terms of our survey, they're more or less representative of the proportions of South Africans in the Australian African population. Sarah, did you want to add anything to that?
Not really. I think that captures it. We applied a weighting process as well, so that the respondents that we did have, their responses were weighted differently if they were overrepresented in the sample. So, yeah, so we capped and weighted. So the idea is that the sample is broadly representative.
Thanks, Sarah. Then the question about, speaking to the political parties, local, state, and federal level,
yes, we did. We did.
Yeah. So, Chika, you want to jump in and answer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Yeah, we actually had interviews with some of the even current local members of parliament, as well as both in South Africa, in Southern Australia, South Australia, and even at the SCT and other places. There have been quite a number of, even in Western Australia, we have some members who have been both in old parliament and current ones, and even newly elected members of parliament, and they were all included in this sample survey. Thank you.
Thanks, Chika.
And in terms of their views, I think the question is, what's their position? it became clear that some of them felt, look, if nobody is going to talk for us, then we actually need to get our voices heard. And I think when Farida was talking about whether Africa has got a voting bloc, yes, from the statistics, we actually have enough voting bloc in Australia, even each state. From South of even, sorry, I don't know why I keep calling South Africa. Yeah, almost every state has almost a voting bloc within each of the states of African migrant population.
Thanks, Chika.
We have two more questions that have come through. The first asks, what specific systemic or structural barriers have you identified that disproportionately impact African students?
That wasn't our research question. There is a lot of research on African background students that has already been done. Most of it is qualitative. We will be able to do that analysis. What I was saying about the when we can do a more fine-grained analysis of the differences in effects based on visa category. So we will be able to do that and to see what sorts of barriers people identify. But it's kind of like the way that question is worded. We'll be able to show patterns from this survey, but that's what surveys are for. They're for showing patterns. They're not going to give you the detail, except for those, the few kind of the comments that we had at the end. So, but that would be an interesting question for further research. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. We do have a comment. Oh yeah, sorry, Chika, go.
Yeah, I actually wanted to just point out when Farida was giving the data about the recognition of qualifications and the job satisfaction, it's also something for us to be aware that, and this is also anecdotal from some of the research interviewees, that some of them retrained, even though this is important to know, some of them had to retrain to get to the positions that they now have, rather than a recognition of their prior degrees in their countries of origin in Africa. And so, for example, some have PhDs who had to actually do TAFE courses in order to get some qualifications. So that's something that we need to also understand, that is not as straightforward as a translation. Giving an example, medical practitioners who came from South Africa were recognized, but they had to do an exam. Those who came from the UK were recognized. And this is the systemic system, because while in Africa they practiced, but for them to transition, they had to do an exam. But if they came from South Africa or from the UK, they actually had exemption, which is an interesting, so that's something to be aware of.
Thanks, Chika.
Yeah, thank you. We have two more questions from Michael. So the first one is, on the results about political leanings, is it reflective of the perception of the policies of those parties towards migration, migrants, and diverse people? And then the second one, on the results of qualifications, which we've kind of been talking about already, was there a way to assess if the overly satisfied respondents got some form of education in Australia, or their education history was entirely from Africa?
Okay, so that second question relates to Chika's point. Yeah. And I, the question was worded in a way that it was basically, sorry, I'm just looking back at my. On the hard copy, sorry. I don't know. The question was worded in a way that was about that I'm working at a level that recognizes my qualifications and experience. Now, if somebody had been qualified as a doctor and then had to retrain as a medical, technician or something like that, so a lower level job, I would have thought that they would answer that question no.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, that you can never, that's the problem with surveys. You can't prod the people and say, oh, what do you mean by that? So, you know, it's an interesting question. I see Dom has his hand up, and I'll get Dom to speak in a moment. But I do want to just drill down a little bit. Was there a way to assess if the overly satisfied respondents got some form of education in Australia? We did not ask the question, where was your education? So no, there is not a way to do that. But this was a big sample. Let's not bring to our interpretation of this, you know, we're used to the deficit sort of model, and so we want to see, oh, well, there must be something wrong with this data. And you know, I'm not saying that it's perfect data or whatever, but I think there's something interesting in there that we need to be kind of pretty confident about. In terms of shifting the narrative slightly. Sorry, Dom. Go ahead.
So I'm thinking that that data on the percentage of people who indicated their educational qualifications were recognized may well, number one, reflect the fact, but which we will ordinarily, as you made a point, that we shouldn't come in with our own prejudged conclusions about what should be the situation. So it may well reflect the fact, but also it may well be people have not, I made actually jotted a point to make this conclusion. It may well be people have not understood the question, or it may well be that at the point that they were answering the question, the issue of their qualification was no longer an issue. They've done a test, or they've gone through some process of assessing their qualification. They've met their requirement. They are working them. They are working at the moment that they were answering the question. So at that point in time, the question of their qualification is no longer an issue. So if the question was framed, depending on how the question was framed, and if they were answering the question looking back at the time that they got their job, whether they needed to meet some qualification to start the job, it may well be that the answer will have been different. So to conclude, it may reflect the fact, but it may also be that at the point of answering the question, the issue around whether you had to meet certain qualification was no longer an issue. So in that case, it's not actually reflecting what was the situation at the time that they got the job. So this is really a question of interpretation for us as the researchers to interpret and come to certain conclusions. And in doing so, we will see that, yes, there is a possibility that it reflects the fact. But actually, this could also be possible ways that people had in mind when they were answering that question. One other point that I wanted to make relates to people who indicated they came to Australia to accept a job. And as you said at the beginning of the presentation, we want to change the deficit narrative. And we all know, as a matter of fact, that the Australian migration regime is designed in the national interest of the country. I have looked at the Migration Act, probably Section 4 of the Act. I looked at it a very long time ago, so I may be referring to the wrong section. But I think if you look at the Migration Act, it has to do with the fact that the regulation of migration is done in the national interest. So people who come in and they have already had jobs back home and all of that may have come in not just because they were dissatisfied with their economic situation. They came in because they simply got an opportunity that the Australian system offered them, because the Australian system was looking for them, and they responded to that opportunity.
Yeah.
So in that sense, our interpretation of the data ought to emphasize the fact that some people are here because the Australian migration regime positively recruited, looked for those persons. And responses of the nature that we have, where people said they came in because they got job offers, allow us to be able to come to that interpretation, linking it to the Australian migration system, which is actively looking for people to come in because of the deficit, the short supply of skills in the system. The skill migration system essentially is in response to the national need, and people who come in with jobs from Africa and other parts of the world come in because of that system. And that is an aspect that we need to emphasize in our interpretation of some of these data. Thank you.
Thanks. Victor had his hand up, and then also Janet, but Victor seems to have put his hand down. Did Dominic?
No.
Sorry?
I put my hand down because I was just about to rush into another meeting, but
Sorry.
I'll just pause. Mine is, look, this is Farida, and your team, this is a really good study, very great insights. But I also do recognize that it's a very big study. So my question, I suppose, is very big, and I'm happy for you to take it as a comment if you can't answer it in this session. What kind of policy impact do you envisage this study having? What kind of particular recommendations? And maybe you haven't reached that point in your drafting of the reports. But what kind of policy impacts are you aiming to achieve with these fantastic results?
And can I just quickly jump in?
Sorry,
Because
yes.
there's two other questions that are kind of asking the same thing. So then
Yeah.
maybe we can comment all at the same time. So basically, Ken was asking what follow-up work is planned following the analysis. And then Franca also asked, is there any policy or media informing work to help shift the narrative?
Yeah, so I mean, these are really good questions, and Victor already answered it for us, which is that we haven't quite worked that out yet, but we do recognize that what we're getting is a different story from the one that's sort of out there. So what we don't want to come out of this is to say, okay, government, you don't need to be providing services or assistance or targeted leadership programs or whatever so that would be a negative outcome, I think. Okay, but what we could say is, hey, there are people who do feel disenfranchised. There are people who do feel as though they don't have any voice within the political system and so on. And yet we also see that there are increasingly Africans being represented at all levels of the political system. Is there a way that we can kind of match these up? Is there a way that government could develop some sort of program which would encourage younger people, for example, to be mentored by the more established people who are in politics? So it's that sort of stuff. It's not to say, oh, everything's okay, that's done now. It's to say things are better than the story that you've been telling, but there are people who are falling through the cracks in terms of qualification recognition and so on. And so, here are some recommendations for what could be done. And most of those recommendations would be around, hey, look at this incredible community. Look at the capacity that is already being demonstrated in the political and economic sphere. And how can we assist you? How can the community assist you to respond to some of the challenges that have been identified using that existing incredible capacity? Thanks for the question, Victor. It's a good question.
So just a point that we might want to note some of these questions. They might be useful as we. So I think it will be good to really keep a record of these questions so we can avert our minds to them when we are doing the interpretation.
Thanks, Dom. Yeah, I agree. We'll keep those, and we'll also keep a transcript of the discussion as well, because the points that people have made are really helpful. Janet, you wanted to make a point or a question?
Just making point. Apologies, you'll not be able to see my face because it's difficult for my computer to deal with teams. In terms of people who are wondering about why certain professional qualifications are not recognized or have to do a recognition training in Australia, I want to point out that it's not only Australia. There's large literature on that, that many of the countries that Africans or call it other minority countries migrate to, it depends on the profession you have. If you are dealing with certain professions, whether you are in Australia, UK, US, Canada, you have to do a recognition training. So there is no, we shouldn't see that as a negative or discriminatory aspect in Australia. It depends on the system. It's like, as mentioned by Dom, that if you come, or either Dom or Farida, if you come from UK or somewhere, you don't have to. We should remind ourselves that these systems are set on their standard, and that's how we are treated. There are others, whether you come from Africa or not, you just can go straight into your workplace. In terms of the policy part of it, normally researchers, how do I say it? We uncover information and we leave that to the policymakers to use it for policy. And for this study, you see the positive of it, even though we have huge percentage of people from South Africa who might be fair skin, the study has given us that insight into the Black majority, the Black proportion who are also in Australia. And given the migration policies, there is a slide that breaks down where people are employed in their occupation. You see that people have migrated based on their skills, and most of those people are employed. So what this is saying is you shouldn't be just walking on the street, at least those who don't know, including people who might be making policy, that, oh, you are Black, you are here, you are taking out our jobs. No, people are fully engaged and are contributing to the economy. We'll be analyzing the data. I should mention that I'm one of the CIs, and I'm particularly in the economic sphere of studies. So we'll be doing a little bit more to see exactly what people are doing. And that's all I want to add at this time, at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Those are really useful points. Thanks. Were there other questions? Oh, sorry. One of the questions I didn't answer was the question about what follow-up work is planned. Basically, we're continuing with the other parts of the study. You know, I showed those 4 blocks of different activity. So we need to analyze the interview data. There's interview data from the general community, from community leaders, and from political leaders and diplomats. So that will give us another dimension as well. Ruvy's work, as we talked about, Ruvy's work on associations, Natando's work on remitting and so on. So yeah, and we're sort of still, we're more or less just at the beginning of year 3 of a 3-year project, and so we are starting to think about what the implications are. So we don't quite know yet what else we'll be doing with this.
Thank you. I did say we'd open up for another 5 minutes, and now we're 1 minute to the 5 minutes. So maybe we'll let the final hand up comment, and then maybe Farida have a response to that. And then if we haven't gotten to your comment, please do email us if you really, really want us to address it, and we will respond that way. Melike, if you don't mind asking a comment question.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, my name is not Melike, actually. This is my wife's account. I couldn't log into my account. My name is Aswad Tarambo, and I'm from Zimbabwe. And I want to ask, you gave us statistics about Blacks and whites, how they're affected. My question is, what about people from North Africa? Because I've met a lot of them and then don't identify as Black or white.
I know.
So in terms of your data, how did you analyze that, or how do you analyze that?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And this is, as I said, we're at the very early stages. We've just received the data from the social research company, and we did a very quick, we actually asked them to do a very quick analysis. I wanted them to break it down by gender and by race, because nobody collects race data. Like in Australia, there is no race data. Any of the surveys, they simply do not collect that data. So you know that people are born in South Africa, or their parents were born in South Africa, but we have no idea whether they're white South Africans or not. So we asked the question, and we did break it down by kind of North Africa. Yeah, we had a number of different kind of racial categories. And what we did for this very quick, because we wanted to get some of the data done, I asked him to put black and mixed. So mixed was a category. So we put black and mixed together, and then we put everybody else together. So the people from North, or people who did not identify as black, whether they were Asian background or North African background or what, they ended up in the white and other category, which is not ideal. They were very small proportions of our sample, but so what we will do before we publish this or anything is that we will try to break that down into smaller groups. The problem with breaking it down into smaller groups is that then you end up with very small samples, and then you can't say very much about them. However, if we want to be kind of pure about it, we could leave out mixed, and we could leave out all of the others, and we could just put the people who identified as black and those who identified as other. So what we'll probably do is to play around with the stats, see what sorts of patterns we end up with, and then make a decision based on what's going to be kind of most reflective of the reality that we think is out there. This is always a problem, and this is why nobody asks the race question in surveys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a good question, though. Thanks.
Thank you. I guess we'll close on that note. Obviously, this has caused a lot of chatter, so thank you everyone for your engagement, for staying with us a little bit longer. Thanks, Farida, for the presentation, and all the CIs for jumping in and answering the other questions as well. As I said, the recording of the presentation will be on our website within the next 2 weeks, so you can go read back, watch it back, ask a few questions on our email addresses, which is also on our website. Other than that, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.